What is happening, everybody? It is Thursday evening, which means what? We are going to look at the upcoming OwnersBox slate, and we're going to build some lineups for Thursday night football. And we'll see what ends up coming up here in the Sims tool. If you guys could do me a favor as you're watching this, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you have any questions or comments for myself at all, throw them into the YouTube chat, and I will answer any questions that you have. As for OwnersBox for tonight, we've got the Jets taking on the Cleveland Browns. And also, if you guys want to sign up at OwnersBox, if you've not already done it, use the link below in the description box. When you sign up at OwnersBox for the first time, you do get a deposit bonus of up to $500. So something to take advantage of to help build your bankroll. And as of right now, we actually only have the Thursday night football game loaded into the Sims. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build lineups for Thursday night football in the Sims for OwnersBox. And then I'll build out some lineups for DraftKings for the main slate on Sunday. And we'll start to look at some of the players there and how they also might correlate to OwnersBox, some of the top stacks we're getting to, because it's what we got to work with here. So any questions you guys have, throw them into the YouTube chat. I could also go over some bets if that is something you guys are interested in, or if you have any questions about bets, we can hit on that as well. But let's start here by generating lineups for Thursday night football, this Browns-Jets game, which better quarterback play than would be expected, I guess, on paper. We've got Simeon going up against Joe Flacco. Flacco's actually been pretty serviceable for the Cleveland Browns, which I wouldn't have thought that was going to be the case a few weeks ago when he was all of a sudden named the Browns starter due to injuries and the Deshaun Watson situation, him being out long-term. But Joe Flacco, he's been the Browns' best quarter. The last few weeks of Joe Flacco has been the best quarterback play for the Browns since Baker Mayfield's rookie season. And I don't even think that's all that controversial of a statement. I think most people would probably agree that Joe Flacco, he's been solid for the Browns. But let's see. What is the payout for the OwnersBox Thursday night football? It is 20% to first. All right, so we'll set this to 20% to first, and it is a max entry of 35 lineups. So we'll favorite the top 35 in here and see what the exposures look like. Also, have you guys built lineups out for tonight at all yet? Curious to see what you guys are getting to, where you guys might like for tonight's slate, and I'll see how that may differ from what shows up here in the Sims. So favorite the top 35. That's 25, not 35. There's the 3. All right, so top 35 lineups favorited. And let's look at some metrics here. First off, let's look at the Sim ROI. What are our top overall rated lineups? Actually, there's a couple here that have Sim ROIs of just over 70% and are rating out better than all the rest of the lineups by a little bit. Number one lineup here is Simeon in the multiplier spot with Joe Flacco, David Njoku, Allen Lazard, and Garrett Wilson. And then our second lineup here is Jerome Ford with Kareem Hunt, Allen Lazard, Breece Hall, and Garrett Wilson. So if you're hand building lineups, not all that frequently would you build lineups where it's like, hey, Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt together. But that's one of the benefits of the Sims, is because it is going to look at some of these pairings for a showdown slate, even if they might be negatively correlated, and still might find it to be a good lineup for a couple of different reasons, either ownership, or it might just be a combination of players that the field is so low on that the odds of these players going off at the same time does exceed the amount of times that the field is playing these two players together. So these are the top two lineups here. One with Simeon in the multiplier spot, one with Jerome Ford. Let's go ahead and look at dupes now. And even though some of these lineups are expected to be duped fairly heavily, they still make it into our top lineups. Although for the most part, the lineups that have the most dupes are not in our top ROI lineups. But if we look at the lineup that is expected to be duped the most tonight on OwnersBox, it is Amari Cooper with Cedric Tillman, David Njoku, Jerome Ford, and Garrett Wilson. So actually interesting that the number one most duped lineup for tonight on OwnersBox doesn't include either of the quarterbacks. Now, if there was a game that it was going to include one of the quarterbacks, this would obviously be one of them. Joe Flacco on one side, Simeon on the other side. And I know that people are going to want to play Flacco, but Simeon probably less so. If you look at all of our other duped lineups, Joe Flacco is in the multiplier spot in a good amount of them. Second most duped lineup, which actually still did wind up in one of our top 35 Sim ROI lineups, as Joe Flacco in the multiplier spot. Third most duped lineup, Joe Flacco in the multiplier spot. Fourth most duped lineup, Joe Flacco in the multiplier spot. So most of the lineups that are duped the most do include Joe Flacco in that 1.5x spot. If we just sort lineups here by fantasy point projection, and this is why I've been telling people when it comes to the Sims tool why you shouldn't only be building your lineups based on projected fantasy points. Because if I sort my lineups here by just the fantasy point projection, most of my top lineups are not the ones that are projected for the most fantasy points. The lineups that are expected to be the most profitable have other factors in them as well, including like how do the players correlate? What is the ownership of those players? And then also stuff like how often is the field playing certain unique combinations of players in lineups? These are things that really matter for Showdown. And that's why if I just sort my lineups by fantasy points, we get a couple of lineups in here that are in my top 35, but most of my highest projected lineups simply by fantasy points are not my lineups that are expected to be most profitable tonight. But these ones in here, Joe Flacco, Simeon, Njoku, Tyler Conklin, Jerome Ford, and then Amari Cooper in the multiplier spot, Joe Flacco, David Njoku, Jerome Ford, and Jeremy Ruckert. These are two lineups that did project well from a fantasy standpoint perspective, but are also two of my higher Sim ROI lineups. Now let's go and look at some of the individual player exposures for the slate. And if you guys haven't done yet, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Any questions or comments you have, throw those into the YouTube chat and I can answer them. But let's go ahead and look at our exposures. And let's start with the multiplier. All right, put a C in here for captain. Captain exposures. We are getting to the most of Joe Flacco. Now, with that said, about even with the field because he's expected to be fairly popular. 24% ownership in the multiplier spot. That is the most of any player in this game. I actually would have guessed it was going to be Amari Cooper. He comes in as the second most projected owned captain for tonight's slate. So what are we doing with some of the chalky options? Flacco about even with the field. Amari Cooper slightly underweight. Nothing really all that crazy, though. We're getting to him in 14% of lineups, which is projected for 19% captain ownership. What are we overweight to? Overweight to Jerome Ford. I like this a good amount because if we look at the players who are expected to have the most ownership in the captain spot, it is Amari Cooper. It is Joe Flacco, which means what? Passing game, throwing the football. What happens if Joe Flacco or Amari Cooper don't have big games? Like, what is one of the more likely reasons for that to happen? Probably because Jerome Ford is a big rushing game, and he's the one who scores the touchdowns. So if Joe Flacco is throwing touchdowns to Amari Cooper, which is what the field is generally gravitating towards, well, then obviously that comes away from Jerome Ford, but it goes vice versa. So I think this is a good way to get some leverage, getting a little bit overweight to the field on Jerome Ford while coming in slightly underweight to Joe Flacco, Amari Cooper. Reasonable way to generate leverage tonight. From the Jets side of the game, we have some players we're getting exposure to. Garrett Wilson, a little bit overweight to the field on him. Actually coming in underweight to the field here on Breece Hall. Breece Hall is expected to be the most popular captain from the Jets and the third most popular overall in the game, only getting to him in 8.6% of my top lineups. Here's an interesting one, though. We're overweight to Garrett Wilson. We're overweight to Trevor Siemian in the captain spot. And Siemian only project for 2.8% ownership. Is Siemian good? Absolutely not. But this is a one-game slate. Quarterbacks are generally the highest scoring fantasy players that we have on an average basis. If you get a quarterback on one side of this game at sub 3% ownership, yeah, it's going to be pretty appealing to me. So like Siemian as a contrarian option, same as Garrett Wilson in the MVP spot, captain spot. And then we're underweight to the field on Njoku, underweight to the field on Breece Hall. The two big leverage spots for us here. Siemian, Ford, or I should say three spots. Siemian, Ford, Wilson, those are all the guys that we're overweight to in that multiplier spot. Let's look at the flex options now. What are we doing in the flex? So still getting to a good amount of Breece Hall, right? 42.9%. And also just kind of scrolling down. We still have it sorted by leverage, but let's go ahead and just sort by the exposures here. So David Njoku, about even with the field width. We're a little bit underweight to him as far as a multiplier spot option, but then in turn getting overweight to him in the flex spot. So overall, about even with the field on David Njoku. I like the ownership that we're getting to here on Breece Hall. So while Breece Hall is somewhat popular as a multiplier option, almost nobody's playing him in the flex spots. At only 18.8% projected ownership for Breece Hall as a flex option. So we're getting overweight to him here. I like that. I like that as a way to differentiate some lineups. It's a brutal matchup for Breece Hall, and maybe the Jets do start to bring down his workload a little bit. Now they're not going to be a playoff team. We know that. It's towards the tail end of the season, but there's only a one-game slate. There's only so many options to go to, and most of them are not all that great looking. So Breece Hall, we have projected for 12.84 fantasy points. That is the third most of any player in this game, and he's only projected for low ownership at 18.8% because people are gravitating towards the Browns side of the game, the Browns passing game. Give me Breece Hall, low ownership. Also, from the Jets side of the game at low ownership, getting to Tyler Conklin as a value option. He's only expected for 29.1% ownership. So guys, we're getting overweight to at different ends of the pricing range, right? We're overweight to an expensive Breece Hall, and we're overweight to an inexpensive Tyler Conklin to save some salary. About even with the field here on Garrett Wilson overall, slightly underweight in the utility spot, overweight to him in the multiplier spot. On the Brown side of the game, we're getting a little bit overweight to Elijah Moore here. He's going to be pretty much unowned in the multiplier spot. Not somebody to advocate for as a multiplier option, but in the flex spot, Elijah Moore, particularly in lineups that don't include Amari Cooper, I think Elijah Moore is somebody to look at. Amari Cooper's coming off a game. He had 265 yards, 2 touchdowns, 11 catches on 14 targets last week. People are going to want to play him in Showdown today. There's going to be, and by the way, for good reason. But I do think he's going to go potentially a little bit over on even more than data can account for because of some of the recency bias, considering that Amari Cooper is coming off one of the biggest fantasy games that we've seen of the entire year. I think Elijah Moore is a reasonable way to pivot off of Amari Cooper tonight. Other players here in the flex spot, about even with Joe Flacco, no real stand there. Jerome Ford, a little bit underweight to him here, but it's because we're overweight to him in the multiplier spot. Let's go ahead and see who we are actually significantly underweight to. So in the flex spot, we're coming in underweight to Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt projected for 27% ownership. We only got to him in 11% of lineups. Amari Cooper, we're coming in well underweight to him in both the MVP spot, that multiplier option, as well as the flex spot. So looks like if I'm playing lineups on OwnersBox and entering this set of lineups, I'm going to be rooting against Amari Cooper, which is obviously scary considering the game he had a few days ago. But like I said, I do think that means he's probably going to go a little bit over-owned here. Jeremy Ruckert was in some of the lineups, so technically we do come in underweight to him, but he's such a contrarian option that it's no real crazy stand of 3% of Jeremy Ruckert when he's projected for 8% ownership. And nothing else here that really stands out to me. If you guys have any questions, let me know in the YouTube chat. But if not, let me go and pull up the contest generator for the main slate. And I'll build lineups out for DraftKings here. The OwnersBox data in the Sims tool, it's going to be updated in short order, but just not in there quite yet. We got a few days to go. So going to build them out in DraftKings and see which stacks we're getting to, and we'll see how that might apply to OwnersBox. In the meantime, pull up some bets for an odd shopper. What is projecting well for Thursday Night Football from a betting angle, if anything? And if you guys want to sign up at Odd Shopper, you can go sign up and you could use the promo code Greg to get yourself 20% off. Also, we have a Discord channel where I post some of my favorite bets, answer questions people have. So it's fun to sweat bets and hang out. But let's see. Today, NFL. What's popping up in Odd Shopper? What's projecting well? Number one bet of the day in Odd Shopper. Oh, here's a bet actually I like a good amount. The over-under for Kareem Hunt's receiving yards, 3.5. So we basically just need one reception out of Kareem Hunt for this to hit, because I do think more often than not, Kareem Hunt is going to get to over 3.5 receiving yards. Now, the game script, the Browns are favored, so it's not like they're going to have to throw the football all that much in this spot, but here's Kareem Hunt's targets in recent games. 4 targets last week, 1 target the week before, 1 target, 1 target. So he has had at least 1 reception now in, 5 of the last 6 games. So I feel pretty good about this. Let's go with Kareem Hunt over 3.5 receiving yards as a top bet here on Odd Shopper. That's one that definitely makes some sense to me. Super low number. The best available line, by the way, is at Bet365. They have it minus 110 on the over 3.5. See if there's any other bets that are looking good for tonight. Tonight, we've got Tyler Conklin. Conklin over 3.5 receptions. This is one that doesn't have necessarily like the highest projected odds of winning, but the line is plus 140 on over 3.5 for Tyler Conklin. So I think that's a bet that we could consider as well. I'm going to have to log out and log back in here. Let me pull this off for a second. Log myself out and log myself in. Don't worry, I see my password or anything. All right. In the interim, Tyler Conklin over 3.5 receptions. So the best available line is plus 140 for Thursday Night Football on Tyler Conklin. That is also at Bet365. We have the fair odds at plus 115. So not a bet that we're expecting to win most of the time, but more often than what the odds are showing. So Tyler Conklin, we have over 3.5 receptions, winning 47% of the time. So plus 140, that does rate out as pretty good value. 12% expected ROI on that line. But nothing too much else that's standing out. If you guys have any bets that you like, throw them into chat and I could look up the projected odds on them. Got Brees. Actually, this might not be a bad one. It's not projecting quite as well as some of the other ones that we have, but still, we've got Brees Hall for over under 3.5 receptions. And Brees Hall, if we think about the game script of this game, right, the Jets are going to be playing from behind in all likelihood. We've got the Browns as fairly significant favorites by touchdown. So if the Jets are trailing late, we're expecting to throw the football, I could definitely get behind over 3.5 receptions for Brees Hall. Fair odds, we have projected minus 173, and this line is available at minus 155. So Brees Hall, I like him for over 3.5 receptions. By the way, it actually looks like we do not have the data updated for any of the slates in the Sims for the main slate yet. So might have to wait until tomorrow to go work out more of that. By the way, if you guys want more information on main slates from the Sims, tomorrow, Friday afternoon, Friday morning-ish, 11 a.m. Eastern time, from 11 to 12, Loft and I are going to be breaking down the main slate for the football. We'll be going through the Sims, and we usually build lineups out. We look at some of the top projected lineups, and then we react to it. We try to see, like, hey, what would we be doing differently if the slate locked right now? So go check that show out tomorrow if you want more info on the Sims from us. We've got T Sizzle Main 165 says he already knows my password. Jimmy B is made of tissue paper 69420. And here we go. All right. I've got some stuff up for main slate now for NFL. I'll pull this on screen in a second. So people know I've got a big rivalry with Jimmy Butler. He's my arch rival. Him and I were supposed to have a charity boxing match. Jimmy didn't show up, and he has since not answered any of my messages on Twitter. And on top of that, he misses NBA games constantly. He's falsely labeled some sort of Iron Man, which we know is not the truth. Jimmy Butler misses a lot of games. But T Sizzle, man, good shout out. And not what my password is, but you're close to it. Jimmy B is made of tissue P 69420. You're close. You're close. I don't want to give you too many guesses because I think you'd figure it out at this point. So those are the NFL bets that we're liking for tonight in Odd Shopper. And while I'm getting the NFL slate simmed out, I'll look for some NBA bets for tonight as well. Let's see what's standing out in the NBA side of things. And one that is projecting well for us that I think also makes some sense. Tyrese Halliburton over under a 42.5 PRA. Halliburton's had a very strong year, but we're still projecting the under decently well for tonight. Halliburton under 42.5 PRA. We have the fair odds of minus 137 when actually books are offering plus money on Halliburton under 42.5. He's also dealing with an injury tonight. He's questionable to play. So that also kind of throws, a little bit of a wrench into the situation with Tyrese Halliburton. Obviously, if he's out, the bet ends up getting voided. But even if he plays, maybe he's not at 100%. Another reason to maybe lean a little bit more towards the unders there on Tyrese Halliburton. As for other bets here, so yeah, there was the Halliburton under 42.5 PRA. There is also a line here on Keldon Johnson under 5.5 rebounds, which is another one, plus 115. We have that bet winning 50% of the time, so plus 115 does look pretty good. But all right, let's pull the Sims back on screen. We can look at the main slate now. I'll favor the top 150 lineups and just go through the players that are projecting the best at each position. Top overall projected lineup is a San Francisco 49ers stack. Let's go over to some of the exposures there. But first, we got a question from Nigel in the chat. Nigel is asking us, hi there, in PPR, should I flex Brees Hall or Chris Olave? He is already starting Evans, so I assume you mean Mike Evans, Reek, I assume that's Tyreek Hill, Austin Eckler, James Conner. Well, it seems like you have a pretty how many, is it like 4 people in this league? How do you have Brees Hall, Chris Olave, Mike Evans, Tyreek Hill, Austin Eckler, and James Conner all on the same team? I see why you're in the finals. Pretty loaded squad. But yeah, let's go through some of the projections we have on the site. So let's look for Chris Olave. Chris Olave, we've projected for 14.92 fantasy points. If you guys remember our projection on Breece Hall, it was a little bit lower than that. So with that in mind, I'm going to go with Chris Olave. I think Olave is the guy you should be going to there, Nigel. Go with Olave tonight. Well, not tonight, this week. Breece Hall would have been tonight. But all right, so these are the players I'm getting the most to at each position for the main slate. Starting with the quarterback. How do you spell QB incorrectly? Press the wrong button. QB. It's 2 letters. I should be able to spell that correctly. Anyway, quarterbacks I'm getting the most exposure to here. It is Brock Purdy, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Tyrod Taylor showing up in a good amount of lineups. He's very cheap this weekend, and I know that maybe we're not super comfortable clicking on Tyrod Taylor's name. You can't even guarantee he plays the entire game because we saw Tommy DeVito get benched midway through last game. But what does Tyrod Taylor have outside of a cheap price point? He's got legs. He could run the football. He is upside for fantasy purposes just because of that ability. So if you're looking for somebody to punt with and save some money with at QB this weekend, Tyrod Taylor looks like a reasonable option. The other quarterbacks we're getting to, pay up guys, and Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts, and then Brock Purdy. I like this as a bounce back spot for Brock Purdy, primarily because of the matchup. Going up against the Washington Commanders, and the Commanders defense has just been getting shredded the entire season. We have the San Francisco 49ers with, what do they have? I think they have the second best odds in our top stacks of being the highest scoring team for this weekend. The only team ahead of them is the Eagles, but Jalen Hurts quite a bit more expensive than Brock Purdy. So a lot of Purdy. I know we sucked last week, but I like him as a bounce back. Purdy had been crushing it from a fantasy standpoint prior to last week. Running back exposures, getting to a lot of CEH, and once again, he is expected to be the king of the backfield. Jerick McKinnon, Isaiah Pacheco, neither of them are expected to play, at least at the time that I'm doing this video. So with that in mind, CEH looks like a really good value at running back. Following up with him, we've got Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey as pay-up options showing up in a good amount of lineups. McCaffrey about even with the field. Barkley, well overweight. Barkley looks like a contrarian option to play at running back. And then Zamir White is showing up in a good amount of lineups. Once again, Josh Jacobs not expected to play this weekend. So those are our core guys at running back. Wide receiver core options. There's not one guy that projects for like a crazy amount of exposure here for me in the lineups that I've ran, but still, Rashee Rice, my most rostered wide receiver, makes sense. He's somebody who earlier in the year, it was kind of hard to know what was the Chiefs wide receiver room going to look like. Was it just going to be Travis Kelce? Was it going to be Kadarius Toney? Was it going to be MVS? The dust has settled, and we've now found that Rashee Rice is the go-to guy as far as the wide receivers are concerned for Patrick Mahomes. So if I'm getting to a good amount of Patrick Mahomes exposure, it makes sense that I have Rashee Rice in there as well. And then we've got Demario Douglas showing up in lineups as a cheap option. Brandon Ayuk, he correlates nicely with the Brock Purdy exposure. Chris Godwin. Godwin's another option that I think is pretty solid this week. If you guys looked at my quarterback exposures from before, he wasn't somebody I had north of 10% of lineups, but just underneath it, I had Baker Mayfield. So Chris Godwin looks like a pretty good combo with him. And then Quentin Johnston, Jalen Guyton, just a couple of cheap, low-owned guys that are making into lineups as well. Tight end exposures, and then we will wrap it up for the week. If you guys haven't done it yet, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, help keep the content free around here. Tight end, getting to a good amount of Gerald Everett, Travis Kelce. Whenever I get a good amount of Travis Kelce, never going to complain about it. I know that his fantasy season's been a little bit up and down, and it's waned lately, but the entire Chiefs team hasn't been in the best form, we'll call it, as of late. It's just been, especially last week against the Raiders, Aiden O'Connell starting at quarterback, Josh Jacobs was out, and the Chiefs just got crushed at home. But I think this is a good bounce back spot, and I do think the field might come in a little bit under on some of the ownership projections on the Chiefs just because of what happened last week. So Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, Patrick Mahomes, I like getting overweight to all of them from the Chiefs side. Also getting some George Kittle and Chigakonkwo rounding out my core group of guys at tight end. I'm not really comfortable with 53% of Gerald Everett. So if I was entering these lineups right now, I'd probably go and do like a negative ROI boost on Gerald Everett and probably lower him by like, I don't know, 25% or something like that. So that when I go and I build my lineups and favorite them here, this would get me to a little bit less of Gerald Everett. Let's see. What does that get me to Everett now? And I got to 40% Everett and said, like, I would still lower it so that I got to, I don't know, maybe like 20 or 25% Everett. But either way, Guys, thank you very much for watching. If you've not done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want more information on the Sims, Lofty and I'll be doing a show tomorrow. If you want to sign up for any of the packages at Stokastic.com, use the link below in the description box. Lineup generator package, that's a separate package where if you just want lineups, you can get that from us for less than $15. And then we also have our Sims package, which includes the contest generators. You can build lineups on the site. You can simulate lineups on the site. And of course, ownership projections, player projections, all of that is included as well. So guys, thank you very much for watching. Good luck with the game tonight and peace out.